Thank you very much, Katie, for being
Simone,
with
thank
us.
you so much. It's an honor to be with you.
Oh, thank you. You know, the U.S.-China relationship has undergone major overhaul under the Trump administration.
Yes, that's right.
So I wonder whether that change in mind happened with Trump or even people before Trump.
Let me just preface it by saying that I'm a traditional Republican foreign policy person and had really appreciated Trump when he was running for president because he wanted to change direction of American foreign policy, away from the focus on the Middle East and focus on China, and particularly focus on the economic relationship between the United States and China. So yes, it is a very different relationship, and I think it's taken the Chinese, I don't think they believed it at first, that Trump would take it in a very different direction. And here's the direction I think he's thinking. And I was part of his administration at the very beginning when these policies were formulated. Trump's feelings, and my feelings too, and now increasingly more and more Americans have come around to this way of thinking, is that the U.S.-China relationship had been the United States helping China to develop economically, often and sometimes at the expense of our own economy, that we had looked at China the way we looked at Japan, Korea, and even the European nations after the devastation of World War II. That if we help you develop, if we help your economy develop, that you will become a trading partner of ours, that you will be a more open society, and you'll be a more open economy. That was our attitude towards Europe, Japan, Korea, and it worked. It worked extremely well. Those are our strongest trading partners and our greatest allies, and we don't go to war with them. We looked at the Chinese in the 1980s, 90s, and 2000 and said the same thing. We will help China develop, they'll develop a middle class, and then they will be our strong trading partners, and we will not have a military adversarial relationship with them. But what happened with the Chinese was that instead of being a more open society, a more open economy, they closed down. So that Xi Jinping, particularly under the leadership of Xi Jinping, became a more authoritarian society, and then a much more closed economy and a much more mercantilist, aggressive economy, as well as building up a military that potentially even threatens ours in the South China Sea. So the bet on China was wrong, that most Americans, the intellectuals, the businessmen, the foreign policy community, of both Republican and Democratic parties agreed that was what they thought would happen. It didn't happen. Trump said it, I'm going to fix that. And increasingly in the last 3 years, I think the American public has come around to the way Trump sees things. So that he's very popular in the United States, and he is standing up to China, demanding a new economic relationship with the Chinese. A new economic relationship, using trade wars, new trade agreements, first on really the export level of, China buys more stuff from us, but less tariffs. But I think the next part of the relationship when Trump's reelected will address the intellectual property issue and investment opportunities in each country and the mercantilism and the and currency manipulation.
So do you think different aspects of the American society, especially the government sector, has come to a consensus of how this misunderstanding come into being? Is it wishful thinking? Is it innocence? Is it like just a profit-driven business sector dominating the national?
You mean how we came to see the Chinese misunderstood the Americans?
Yeah.
Or
how did the Americans misunderstood China for all
we
these years?
assumed that the Chinese would have followed the same pattern Japan and Korea had followed. And look, the Chinese said to us, Deng Xiaoping famously said to Bill Clinton, he said, China's the little brother, America's the big brother. We want to learn from you. We want a peaceful rise. And I think in the last several years, the Chinese have become more aggressive. I mean, when I was in China a couple of years ago, it was pretty clear that the Chinese leaders would say, you Americans, you're finished. Your day is over. It's now the Chinese century. It's now China's turn to be in charge of the world. So I think the Chinese attitude changed, as well as the American attitude in response to that. So I think where we are now is that the United States, because of our strong economy, because of our energy independence, because of the trade wars and Trump's willingness to play tough, is that we now are going to have a very different relationship with China than perhaps if another president had been elected, Hillary Clinton, someone else.
Okay, so what do you think, talking about U.S.-China relationship, Taiwan is always in the middle.
Absolutely.
And the big question is always China. If China would take over Taiwan by force, maybe in the next 30 years, what's your assessment?
I've talked to Chinese leaders who have really openly admitted that the mistake they made in Korea, in the Korean War, cost them Taiwan. So because of the Korean War and America's belief that it needed to stay in the Pacific as a result, in part of that, that the ability of China to attach, conquer, however you want to call it, Taiwan was really put aside. So that the Chinese, they tell you their goal is the unification of China, which means Hong Kong, Taiwan, other islands that they feel belong to China, what they consider the ancient and sort of probably imperial Chinese lands they want back. So that's where we start. Now, I think that the Chinese, in their dealings with Hong Kong, when they said 2 governments, 1 China, we will respect your separate system, your separate economy, your separate legal system, and we'll still work well in the end. Once the Hong Kong demonstrations started, and I think the Chinese handled it very badly, where they really showed to the world, no, it's not going to be 2 systems. It's going to be 1 system, that Hong Kong is going to have to do what China wants. I think that, again, who was looking? Taiwan. So that the Taiwanese look at China, they look at Hong Kong, and they say, we can't believe that if the Chinese tell us 2 Chinas, Taiwan and China, 1 China, that they're having second thoughts, which I think is why the most recent Taiwan election was very much in the direction of a nationalist leader, of someone who wants to take Taiwan, perhaps even to its own separate Taiwan nation.
Right. I think after this Taiwan election, it becomes really clear Taiwanese people would never accept 1 country, 2 systems. So the question of whether the Chinese Communist Party will take over Taiwan by force surfaced again. So really, do you think it's a big possibility that could happen in the near future?
You never want to guess what other you try to put yourself in the seat of the Chinese, and look at the world through their eyes. And in the eyes of the Chinese, they don't think that they're a developing nation that may eventually learn from America. They think of themselves as the center of the universe. I mean, 中国, right?
Yeah.
That means China, center of the
That's
Middle
perfect
Kingdom.
pronunciation.
Thank you very much. Undergraduate degree in Chinese. So that the Chinese look at their 5,000 years of history and said, well, we had a bad 200, but we've always been the most powerful country of the world. We're going to be the most powerful country of the world again. And so for what's the Chinese ambition? I do believe that they felt or feel that they can replace the United States as the most powerful country in the world. That's the One Belt, One Road. It's the maritime, the greater, what is it called, File My Dash? I don't know. It's the original Japan co-prosperity sphere, but where the Chinese claim the South China Sea is their own. And they want to push America out of the Pacific. Now, I think China was headed in that direction, very definitely headed in that direction. I think that they've had a lot of bumps in the last year. First one was Hong Kong, and then the election in Taiwan. The Chinese understand whatever's going to happen is not going to be easy. And then secondly, now with the coronavirus. China's been going around the world for the last 10 years saying, America's finished, China's the future, we're the model that the world should follow, we're the great leaders, we're this, we're that, and America, especially under Trump, is not a leader of the world, not a leader to be trusted. But what's happened now, first with Hong Kong, and certainly with the coronavirus, where the world is now looking at China and said, you knew about this. You didn't take measures. You didn't have this under control. Your government system of authoritarian system of government didn't acknowledge that you had a problem. I talked to someone from the White House last week who said, with the coronavirus, the Chinese knew they had a problem. And yet they sent the senior leaders of China to the White House to sign the Phase 1 trade agreement. They sent leaders into the Oval Office to shake Trump's hand, and they knew that they had this problem at home, and they didn't tell anybody about it. That's not how a responsible world leader acts.
That's very interesting. So when they signed the Phase 1 trade deal, they already know this deal would not hold because we got this coronavirus
No,
situation.
I don't think it was that. I think I think it's a little bit differently. I think that they do believe that the phase 1 deal will hold. We believe it'll hold. But when they came, they knew that they had a problem at home with the coronavirus. And instead of being a responsible leader in the world community and saying, we have a problem, here's what we're going to do about it, here's what we advise you to do about it, we're going to restrict our travel, they did none of those things. They, in fact, demanded that the South Koreans leave the border open and have no restriction of travel. Well, now South Korea has a major issue with coronavirus. So I think the Chinese have not handled this as a responsible leader of the world should handle an epidemic. The other thing they've done is that, America from the very beginning, we offered to send in epidemiologists, experts on pandemics. We've got a lot of those, but we're good at that. And the Chinese government refused. We finally, I think, sent some American doctors who were part of the World Trade Organization group, but they didn't want America, they didn't want to lose face, they didn't want America to see what they were doing. But why, something like this, which affects all nations, why would China not take responsible actions from the very beginning? I think this will damage China's position in the world standing greatly, especially if this coronavirus turns out to be a worldwide pandemic.
The World Health Organization experts returning from China had a press conference the other day, 2 days ago, and 100% positive comments on the Chinese government.
That they congratulated the Chinese government for handling it. But yet, on the other hand, they or other experts have said that we're not sure that the Chinese statistics, the information we're getting from the Chinese government is the correct one.
Right, and they even said this whole project, this whole joint investigation is decided by Xi Jinping. It's ordered by Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping said we need to let the world know what China's been doing to fight the coronavirus epidemic. He openly said that.
They're going to decide whether it's a crisis or not. In other words, it's a political decision. And yet every country in the world is now facing this. Hopefully there's nothing there. Hopefully it's just another bad case of the flu. But I think that a responsible nation who does feel that it wants a position of a world leadership does not do what the Chinese did. The Chinese should have taken protective measures from the very beginning. They should have warned people. They should have isolated it. Now, I think the Chinese in China have taken measures since, which have been very successful as slowing the spread of the virus. But it's out. It's already in Italy. It's in Iran. Who knows what's in Africa? And I think that it's been very irresponsible of the Chinese government.
Right. So how big of a dent do you think this coronavirus epidemic has put on the world's people's confidence in the Chinese government? Because we have seen how they managed this crisis and stuff. Do you think that will push the world supply chain out of China in a big way?
Well, I think China's it's going to be bumpy. The Chinese may have 5 years ago thought that they were going to have made in China 2025, they were going to dominate the technologies of the future. They thought they were going to have one belt, one road, they were going to have a maritime trade route, they were going to have the South China Sea, nothing was going to stop China. But I think they've got to reassess, the world is reassessing China. The economy is slowing. They have done with the Uyghurs, the Muslim population, basically in concentration camps, what they've done in Hong Kong, the way they've handled the coronavirus, and the way the Chinese have, the way they're acting is not a way a great nation acts. And so I think that this it will take an effect in two ways. One, it'll be economic. Like you said, the supply chain has now been broken up. The supply chain had already changed a little bit during the trade wars, but now the supply chain is going to change greatly. So that's number one. And then number two, as the Chinese economy is slowing and the Chinese behavior. So the world is looking at China and giving it a second look. It's not the great Xi Jinping, the world leader, let's go to Davos and be a great world leader. It's now thinking, wait a minute, coronavirus, Hong Kong, the Uyghurs, the supply chain is changing, the economy is slowing. I think the world is taking a second look. Look, the United States doesn't want to hurt China. We don't want to stop China's natural growth. The Chinese have they've done extraordinary things In just 40 years, they've done what it's taken the West 400 years to do. And they should be commended and congratulated for their industriousness and their hard work and their determination and their self-sacrifice to bring their nation as far as it's come in just really one generation. But at the same time, the United States, I believe, and other countries want an equitable relationship with China. We don't want to stop China. We want China to grow and develop on its own, but not at our expense, not at the expense of the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the 5G situation, especially in Europe. Europe has not been, on the U.S. side in terms of 5G.
Yes, the Europeans, they're looking at 5G and they're saying cheaper,
right,
better,
yeah,
faster. What's wrong? Why don't we get the Chinese Huawei 5G?
Right. So do you think that's a real problem? Can the U.S. persuade its allies in Europe to not go with Huawei? It's not.
I don't know. That's a really good question, because what is the United States offering? Slower, more expensive. I think the United States missed the boat on Huawei. But I do think that we need to explain to our allies in Europe that what does Huawei mean? It's not just like comparing the competitive advantages of one car versus another, because Huawei and China controlling 5G means that China controls the communications infrastructure of the future. Right? It means it controls the internet and all communications that we would have, whether it's storage in the cloud, whether it's telephone, text message, email, any kind of communication. The Chinese, if it's a Chinese infrastructure, the Chinese government's laws say that Chinese companies have to share whatever they find, whatever information they find, with the Chinese government. That's not how we work in America, not how the European countries work. So there will be a price to be paid if the European countries decide to use China, and the United States is going to have to assess what does that mean for intelligence sharing, what does that mean for co-investment. That's one issue. But to me, what it says is a wake-up call to the United States that look at what the Chinese have done. What the heck are we doing? We should be spending a lot more money on research and development. We should be encouraging our students to stop studying French literature and start studying science and technology and engineering and math. And so it's my firm belief that the United States should take a concerted effort, particularly if Trump's reelected, and to have an all-out national effort to develop and to retain the U.S. high technology lead. We've taken it for granted. Our American technology led the Industrial Revolution, it led the digital revolution, it led the information age. But it's not going to lead the next age until we invest in those, in raw data, science, research, and development, unless we educate our population. We're good at developing and inventing and creating and being entrepreneurs. The Chinese are not as good, but we're great at that. But we need to encourage it. And so I would hope, and I'm not a big government person, but I think this is one place I really want to see my American government take a leading role in encouraging the development of the technologies of the future.
All right, great.